If an arrest warrant is issued, but no one is around to enforce it, does it matter at all? It sounds like a philosophical question about trees falling in a forest, but in fact, it is a serious issue that the international community has to grapple with. On March 17th, 2023, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for none other than Vladimir Putin. The case involves the movement of children from regions of Ukraine that Russia occupied, mostly Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, but also from the Kharkiv and Mykolaiv regions that Russia controlled earlier in the fighting. In short, Russia sent those children eastward to become Russian citizens and to be subsequently adopted by Russian parents. The allegations represent a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits such reshuffling. Interestingly, there is very little dispute that something like this has been happening. In fact, Russia has been public about it, with an official commissioner on the job, and is more than happy to share the news on the Kremlin's official website, which greatly facilitated the ICC in gathering evidence to meet its relatively high bar. But there is a difference in opinion on the interpretation of what is happening. Russia's framing of this is that of a humanitarian mission, replete with teddy bears, intended to give Ukrainian war orphans a home. Ukraine will tell you that Russia is intentionally kidnapping its youth, targeting pre-existing orphanages, summer camps, and boarding schools, forcibly deporting the children to Russia, and giving them an anti-Ukrainian re-education, all with the endgame of addressing Russia's dismal 1.5 births per woman and declining an aging population more generally. The ICC found the latter interpretation consistent with the evidence, leading to the arrest warrant. But that takes us back to the original tree in the forest question. Does it even matter if no one can enforce it? International courts do not work like their domestic relatives. When a normal city court issues a warrant, there is a police force with a primary purpose to execute those warrants and arrest the subjects. In contrast, no one from the ICC is going to be knocking on the Kremlin's door tomorrow to arrest Putin. Instead, the ICC must rely on a state to do that job on its behalf. Will it be Russia? Obviously not. The Kremlin's response was pithy and accurate. We do not recognize this court. Oh, and Medvedev added a little bit of spice by threatening the court with hypersonic missiles. Anyway, recognition around the world is in fact spotty, with the United States, China, and India as other generally notable non-members, and Belarus, Iran, and North Korea as important non-members for a reason we will get to later. As for those who are members of the ICC, as examples, the United Kingdom or France, they won't be knocking on the Kremlin's door either. Even if they could somehow get through Russia's army, which, despite the troubles in Ukraine, would be much better capable of defending the Russian homeland, there are still about 6,000 reasons why this would be a bad idea. To the media's credit, the reporting I have seen on the warrant tends to discuss the enforceability problem. That's good, because lack of third-party enforcement is International Relations 101. Go watch that video from 11 years ago if you don't believe me. Unfortunately, if you take International Relations 201, you would learn that international courts can matter despite the enforcement problem. With that in mind, let's discuss 4 tangible effects that the warrant will have as the war continues and beyond. First is the immediate effect of media buzz. The winter of 2022 to 2023 caused a slowdown in major news developments regarding the war. Without the ICC's announcement, the major news story for that evening likely would have been New York's potential indictment of former President Donald Trump. Instead, interest in the ICC and Putin spiked. It is no secret that Ukraine needs Western support to overcome an invader the size of Russia. That, in turn, depends on grassroots support for Ukraine. If your average Joe American stops caring about the war, Kyiv will be in trouble. Because many view the ICC as a legitimate institution, no matter their government's official stance, the court system effectively acts like a fire alarm, signaling the existence of a problem to those who might not have been paying attention. Even Lindsey Graham cited the Warrant, not someone you would normally associate with enthusiasm for international courts. He also gave Secretary of State Antony Blinken the juiciest softball question of all time, asking whether European allies should arrest Putin if he ever visited those countries, to which Blinken bluntly said that they should fulfill their obligations. And remember again, the US is not even a party to the ICC. But two caveats come with the idea that the warrant spreads awareness. First, public awareness of the war is already widespread. It was the single biggest news story of 2022. To the extent that the ICC can influence public opinion, it actually needs to change minds. One way or another, I am not sure many were previously indifferent about Putin, especially in the West. Perhaps they were unaware of the issues involving child deportations, but not with Putin's tactics more generally. Outside the West, where there has been more tolerance for Russia's geopolitical musings, perhaps this will matter more. That will not directly change the underlying military situation in Ukraine. But it might mean that Russia faces more struggles with a trade partner or two, which will cause further problems for the Russian economy. The second caveat is that the ICC chose a bad day to release it. Friday in the news industry is known as Garbage Day, fit for the trash dump battle site in Bakhmut. If you have to release a bad story at some point, Friday is the day to do it. The reason? People are distracted by their weekend plans. By Monday, with any luck, the news cycle will have moved on to something else. The ICC has been working on issues related to the invasion for some time now. It was not as though March 17th had to be the day to release the information. Perhaps the ICC could use a better public relations arm? The second way the ruling matters is by restricting Putin's travel. No one may be knocking on the Kremlin's door, but what if Putin comes to them? As Blinken suggested, parties of the ICC are obligated to arrest those with outstanding warrants against them, should those individuals step on a party state's soil. This does not always happen in practice. Omar al-Bashir traveled safely after his warrant, but the threat is still there. With that in mind, it will come as a relief to Putin that his travel since the war began has already been minimal. In fact, in 2023, his first trip outside of internationally recognized Russia occurred 2 days after the warrant was issued, when he visited Mariupol, which, by Russian law anyway, still counts as domestic travel. But August 22nd will bring fresh intrigue. That is when South Africa hosts the 15th annual BRICS Summit, which will also bring together leaders from Brazil, India, and China. During the pandemic, BRICS meetings were held via video conference, but 2023 was supposed to bring everyone together. One problem for Putin. Looking back on the map, South Africa is a party of the ICC. That means if Putin goes to the conference, South Africa is supposed to arrest him. Whether that will happen in practice remains to be seen. If, post-arrest, whoever is running the government in Moscow still likes Putin, those 6,000 reasons for concern come back into the picture. Would South Africa like to try its luck? Well, at least Ireland says it would. Not that Putin would go there anyway. Speaking of which, it is possible that Putin simply finds a reason to not travel to South Africa, and instead sends a proxy so as to not bring attention to the dilemma at all. Another alternative is to shift the meeting to China, India, or Russia itself, given that none are a part of the treaty. One interesting aspect of the announcement is that the ICC could have kept it sealed until there was an opportune time. March 17th was not set in stone. For example, they could have waited until August 23rd, after Putin had arrived in South Africa, and made a surprise unsealing of the document. At that point, Putin would have already put himself in the vulnerable position. Or if the ICC wagered that South Africa would not make the arrest for whatever reason, then they could wait until Putin visited the right country to make their play. The fact that the ICC did not indicates one of two things. First, the court might not think that they could successfully keep the warrant a secret until that point. Or second, they do not think that any country would try making an arrest, and so the entire thing is really about rallying support for Ukraine. The third way that the warrant could influence matters is in a future world where there is domestic unrest in Russia. One option, particularly for leaders that are pessimistic about their ability to survive a rebellion, is to simply leave the country. Exile, as it were, is a golden parachute. It's not as good as remaining in power, but if you have enough money hidden away, you can expect a solid retirement. For example, this was Idi Amin's strategy, escaping Uganda when things looked grim, and instead watching the sun set on his life relatively quietly from the confines of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Juan Perón provides a more extreme example, having bolted from Argentina to Paraguay at the first sign of trouble, wagering that even a small risk of jail or death was not worth battling it out. But Amin and Perón lived in a different era. To summarize, a special counsel at Human Rights Watch once described the situation as follows. If you killed one person, you would go to jail. If you killed 20, you would be institutionalized. And if you killed 20,000, well, you'd be offered exile. However, two major events in 1998 revolutionized everything. First, the Rome Statute was adopted on July 17th, creating the all-important International Criminal Court that issued Putin's warrant. The second occurred on October 16th. Former Chilean President Augusto Pinochet had traveled to London for back surgery. British police entered Pinochet's hospital room and arrested him. This was a rare exercise of the principle known as universal jurisdiction, which harkens back to the days of the Nuremberg trials after World War II. The idea is that the disappearances of Chileans under Pinochet was so extreme that countries disconnected to the crime could still prosecute him. Whatever doubt world leaders had about the enforcement of the Rome Statute was now gone. After March 17, 2023, Putin found himself in the same position. Among those culpable for similar crimes, exile rates absolutely dropped off a cliff post-1998. Those who are not culpable went into exile at virtually the same rate as prior to that year. The central takeaway is that culpable leaders, like even Gaddafi in the middle of a civil war, got scared. This might matter if there is ever some sort of revolutionary push against the Kremlin. If Putin thought that he could fade away into obscurity via a relaxing exile, the ICC warrant disabused him of that notion. The perverse downside here is that it will incentivize Putin to cling to power as long as possible in the event of a civil conflict. And indeed, the average length of civil wars increased post-1998, but only among culpable leaders. How much any of that matters for this case depends on whether you believe the Kremlin was at risk for an uprising, and whether there were plausible places for Putin to go into exile before all of this. On the first question, Putin appears to remain popular domestically, though his numbers may be fading. Thus, while the probability of an uprising in 2023 appears relatively low, whether it will remain low after multiple rounds of mobilization and a rising body count is unclear. As for the exile question, well, who knows? I find it hard to believe that Putin would want to live in Belarus, Iran, or North Korea, his most steadfast allies during the war. And that is before considering how none of them seem like the most stable of governments, and whose potential successors may not be happy to host Putin. That leaves China. Maybe. It is big. And its government seems relatively stable despite its issues with pandemic lockdowns. But you would have to ask Putin what he wants. He certainly seems to be interested in wooing China, though apparently for reasons unrelated to exile. As a final thought for now, Western observers should not let all of these negative consequences of the ICC get them down. Atrocities have declined post-1998, and it seems that much of that is plausibly attributable to the shift in international norms that the ICC championed. Basically, the loss of a golden parachute is broadly deterring world leaders. It just does not appear that Vladimir Putin is one of them. Still, the warrant may have a tangible effect within Russia. Remember the commissioner overseeing the project, Maria Lvova-Belova? She too is also the subject of a warrant. If the ICC is willing to go after bureaucrats as well, it may deter state employees from joining her commission. Children may continue being sent eastward, but the agency may not be able to do it as effectively as before. If you want to know more about the invasion, you will love my book that examines the causes of it. Check below for more information on that. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care. All of that discussion of the Olympics from last time reminded me of another classic Russian blunder, though this one is more of a humorous misunderstanding than a continental catastrophe. The story is a long one, so buckle up. It all has to do with the 1908 Olympics shooting event, again fitting given the current war that we are in. Host country Great Britain dominated the medal counts with 21. Scrolling down the list, we have the United States, Canada, and a bunch of European countries, the usual suspects back then. Meanwhile, Russia was nowhere to be found, and it was all Julius Caesar's fault? Let me explain. On January 1st, 45 BC, Caesar instituted what we now call the Julian calendar. The Roman system before it was a colossal mess, with its leaders occasionally adding an entire month to a single year to align seasons back to the date. Fortunately, by that point, astronomers had figured out that a year should be roughly 365.25 days long. Hence, Caesar adopted a system where years have 365 days, and every fourth adds a leap day. That works out to an average of 365.25 days. The problem is that a better approximation of Earth's orbit is 365.2422 days. The 0.0078 difference might not sound like much, but by 1582, Pope Gregory XIII got fed up with the slow accumulation of drift. He therefore issued a new calendar, the one we now call the Gregorian calendar. It gave us the more complicated system, where years divisible by 100 are not leap years, unless they are also divisible by 400. This gets us much closer to the ideal 365.2422 average days. But more importantly for our story, when people went to sleep on October 4th, 1582, they woke up on October 15th. This synced the seasons back to where they used to be before Caesar broke everything. People listened. France, Spain, Portugal, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Catholic portions of the Holy Roman Empire, and the mess of Italian states that are too numerous for me to give individual flags, immediately followed the edict. Protestant countries eventually joined too. Great Britain, for example, followed September 2nd, 1752, with September 14th. Eastern Europe, on the other hand, was very late to the party. So when Russia's shooting team was told that the shooting event would begin on July 8th, they made sure to arrive a few days early. Except their July 8th was London's July 20th. Russia arrived too late for the event. Interestingly, calendar politics have bled into the war. The Tsars stuck to the old ways, but Russia eventually shifted to the Gregorian calendar following the Russian Revolution. But Eastern Orthodox Christmas remained locked to the Julian calendar date. This is why Russia celebrates Christmas on January 7th. However, the war caused Ukrainians to reevaluate their celebration date. On October 18, 2022, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine gave approval for local dioceses to celebrate on December 25th. Perhaps a sign of further Western pivots to come?